Hi again. We have here today two items which I wanted to show you. One item I recently bought at auction, and another item I've owned for a few years now. We're going to begin with the item that I've had for a while, and it's a printed item. But before I talk about that, I want to introduce a man who was both a printer and a writer and an interesting person. So we're in Prague, today in the Czech Republic, in the end of the 18th century. And the man I want to introduce, his name is Samuel or Shmuel Fleckeles. Fleckeles is a famous name to those who know the history, and that is because of someone who was likely his cousin was Elazar Fleckeles. Rabbi Elazar Fleckeles was the chief rabbi of Prague following that of his teacher, Noda Yehuda, Yechezkel Landau. And this Samuel was older than his cousin, if assuming it was his cousin, and he seems to have flourished in the time of the Noda Yehuda at the end of Noda Yehuda's career. So the first volume we have here was printed by him, printed by Fleckeles, and it is an interesting work. It's called Davar Tov, and it's about grammar and has many examples and different tables of the grammar principles of Hebrew grammar, that most of which relates to the shorashim, which are usually taught in the context of grammar. Shorashim are when you take the root word of a Hebrew word, which is almost always 3 letters, sometimes it's 2 letters, and based upon the root of the word, you create different words. This is, I believe, the only printing, and this work was done by a teacher in Glogau, which was today in Poland, then it was in Silesia, which was part of the German lands. And this man sought out Samuel Fleckeles clearly, as it appears to me, because of his great aptitude for printing a complicated book and the such like that. As you can see here, the amount of different fonts and the work on this centering and creation of the typefaces is really spectacular. The work here has been done where general text is in a certain style, and then the large letters in the words, which are being accentuated, are in a much larger and different typeface, and with nikud, with the vowels or vocalization, and that continues through the whole volume. However, what to me is remarkable is the different layouts of these charts in which words are built upon in different examples. And I've owned this for a few years, and I was impressed at the purchasing of it, at how impressive Samuel Fleckeles was at his creation of such a work in terms of the typeface, in terms of the layout, and in terms of the neatness of the volume. Again, Yechezkel Landau gives approbation, haskama, to the volume, and this is all at the top here. And he meaning Fleckeles, is someone who was known to Noda Yehuda. Now we know more about Fleckeles than just his printing work. We know that he was an educator, and not only a printer, but also he was involved in educating students with difficult subjects, which was which is the difficult part, is to make them available to people, especially to students who are young. And this volume, which I recently bought at auction, is such an example. The title of the volume, which is a manuscript, it's completely in Samuel Fleckeles' hand. The title is Sever Evronot, or Evronos. Now that is a known and more famous title to those who have studied Hebrew manuscripts. Across Europe and some of the Middle East, you had these types of manuscripts with that title, Evronos, for almost a millennia, almost 1,000 years, and they were all about the same subject, although the text varies. And the subject they were on was on which principles do we use to make years, either a full year with 2 Adars or 13 months, or 1 Adar with 12 months. And that was generally the main topic of those different works of Evronot, but added on to that was different things which have involved what's called zamanim, or zamanim means time, but it means more than time. It means matters which have to do with time, and those go into the calendrical cycles, it goes into the zodiac, it goes into all kinds of different elements which become these teaching devices to teach students of Jewish law how to ascertain and figure out the calendar. And so this manuscript begins as a Sever Evronot, and Fleckeles, he lists as a title page all the different things which he wanted to put into this work. Not everything he wanted to put into this work that he was going to write was to make it in, but he makes it clear that this is a teaching device, which I found to be very interesting. He dates the manuscript in 1797. It may have been 1796 if it's after the month of Tishrei. And some of the issues which he says he's going to cover in the title page include at what date in the month of Kislev do they start to recite V'sein Talu Matar or V'tein Talu Matar, and different things which involve the what's called the four tekufot, or the four aspects of the Jewish year. Those two things are linked, and he also said he will go into the calendrical cycles. He'll go into the zodiac. He'll go into different dates in the Hebrew calendar and the history, and he also will go into the secular holidays, what he calls Chagei HaNotzrim. Now, this manuscript wasn't completed. He may have even died right about this time. So unfortunately, we don't have that part of the work, but it's indicated in the title that he was going to work on that. Opening the manuscript, he has an introduction. Again, at the title page, he makes clear that this work is to teach young children, or to teach children at some age of their learning. And to teach them, you would want to introduce a difficult topic before teaching a difficult topic. So he goes into the Hebrew names of the planets. He goes into the periods of the year, the divisions, and he speaks about the astronomical calculations which are in the Talmud and in the Gemara, and he's got other interesting things which I think are very valuable historically. One of them is his calendrical calculation for which days of the year, or which days of the week, the different holidays will fall out between the year 1797 until the year 1815. Those would eventually go into printed calendars where people would purchase it. As these evolved, it became up to a century where you would have a printed device which would tell you what year, for example, Pesach would fall out on. And this is in a manuscript form, his calculation in a chart very similar to his printed work, the different years and which days the different holidays would fall out. He's got an aspect on which years are a full year, or what's called a leap year, or not a leap year, and then he has something very interesting, which he has a teaching device, or what's called a mnemonic, about which months are full months, so a month of 30 days, or which months are half months, a month of 29 days. It comes out that a month with 30 days has 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, but a month of 29 days has 1 day of Rosh Chodesh. For example, he says, Nisan is a king because it has Chag HaMatzot. Chag HaMatzos is Pesach. So Nisan is a full month. Iyar is its helper. Iyar lacks a holiday and it's missing. And he goes on and on like that. And it's a very well created table for the entire calculation, and it's used as a mnemonic. I have no doubt that students in Prague in the last decade of the 18th century would probably memorize this, and they would know it. Moving on, there's more discussion about the different times, different months of the year. And finally, there's something I found to be very interesting, which I have not seen in any other work, and that is that Fleckeles has a different zodiac calculation of the weather of that month based upon what day of the week Rosh Chodesh falls out on. And as an example, if the Rosh Chodesh Shabbat falls out on a Sunday, then the coming spring will be extraordinarily hot. For example, that is how he establishes these sorts of calculations based upon what day of the week the Rosh Chodesh falls out on. Again, I have not seen this anywhere else, and I have not seen where he gets this from. I would be curious to know where he gets it from, but either way, I think it is a very valuable just to show us how students were taught in Prague and the evolving ways of thinking in Prague at the end of the 18th century. At the last page of our manuscript, Fleckeles finishes mid-sentence, and almost as if he disappears. I couldn't find in my research any year specifically that he died. I do know that in the year 1800, 1801, his son, whose name was Laser, probably named after the same person who Fleckeles' cousin, Eliezer Fleckeles, was named after, who was a printer in Prague, printed a very large and nice edition of Sefer HaShorashim, which is related to this topic, based upon Radak, or David Kimchi's work, the expanded edition by Isaac Satnov. Isaac Satnov was another such maskil, or enlightened fellow, who lived at the early 19th century, late 18th century. So that may be evidence to us that Fleckeles may have died at that time. Either way, this is a manuscript which is very interesting to learn the history of education in Prague and the history of teaching difficult subjects which are very close to the educational curriculum of someone who was to be a rabbi and who had to set the calendar, who had to understand the calendar, for all those who never were to understand the calendar without them. They would be relying on them. And this is one of the more difficult studies that was made easy by Samuel Fleckeles.